Wuthering Waves 4.x is starting to sound absolutely insane. Because according to the latest information, Kuro could be preparing some of the biggest changes we've seen for the game yet. We're not just talking about new characters and new region. We're potentially getting older character buffs, a major revisit of version 1.x, and a brand new endgame mode, a new combat system, a double liberation system, 3D character menus, and even 2 free Rover skin. And honestly, some of these changes could completely change how the game feels, especially the double liberation system. Because if the early information is accurate, we could be looking at characters that don't just have one ultimate anymore, but potentially 2 different liberations. So today we're going through everything that's currently being teased for the 4.x era, what these features could mean for the game, and why some of them might be much more important than they initially sound. And of course, if you want to stay up with the date with all the latest Wuthering Waves information, make sure to subscribe and turn on notification. There is still a lot of time before 4.x actually arrives, so there's definitely going to be much more information coming out between now and then. Anyway, let's get into this. Let's start with what is probably the most interesting piece of information here, double liberation skill. According to the early reports, Kuro is working on a new gameplay system where certain characters could potentially have 2 different liberation skill. And if you're wondering what that actually means, the idea is basically that a character could have access to different ultimate abilities depending on the situation. That could mean completely different animations, effects, or even interactions, and this is where things get really interesting. We've already seen concepts similar to this in other games, such as the Star Rail collaboration, where characters can interact through their ultimate abilities, but bringing a system like that into Wuthering Waves could create a completely different way of thinking about team building. Because instead of simply asking which character does the most damage, you could potentially start asking which character actually work together through deliberation. If certain characters can pair their ultimates together or have a unique interaction, this could open up entirely new team compositions. Now, we don't know yet whether double liberation will be exclusive to new characters or whether Kuro could eventually introduce it to existing characters as well, and that's a really important distinction because if older characters can also benefit from this system, suddenly some characters that people haven't used in a long time could have a completely different purpose. But speaking of older characters, this might actually be one of the biggest pieces of information for long-time players. According to the early information, Kuro is reportedly looking into buffing older characters, potentially including the characters from the 1.x era. And I know this is something a lot of players have been wanting for a while because as Wuthering Waves continue to introduce newer characters and more complicated kits, some of the characters from the game's first year have naturally started falling behind. And if you've been playing since launch, there's a good chance you've already invested a lot into some of those characters. So instead of simply letting those characters become permanently outdated, Kuro could potentially bring them back up to the modern standard. And this becomes even more interesting when you connect it to another piece of information we've already heard about 4.0. Because apparently, Kuro isn't just looking for the old characters. They're potentially looking at the old content too. One of the biggest things being discussed for 4.0 is a potential revisit or remake of the original version 1.0 content. And when I say remake, this could potentially go beyond simply making the graphics look better. The early information suggests that Kuro could potentially revisit the story, region, quest pacing, exploration, NPC interaction, and all of that. And honestly, that makes a lot of sense because think about what Wuthering Waves look and feel now compared to what the game looked like when it's first launched. The newer regions have received a lot more visual polish, better animations, and generally feel more refined. The new players starting Wuthering Waves could potentially have a much smoother introduction to the world and story, and for veteran players, it could make going back to version 1.0 actually worth doing again, especially if the changes aren't visual, and if the story pacing, quest, exploration, and all that genuinely improve, then the opening experience could feel very different from what longtime players remember. But we're not done yet because apparently we're also getting new endgame content. The next major piece of information is a potential new endgame mode alongside a new combat system. Now, we don't have the details for either of these yet, so there's obviously a lot of uncertainty. But just a possibility of another permanent or recurring endgame mode is pretty significant. More endgame content means more reasons for player to keep coming back. And if this new mode introduces additional rewards or currency or asteroids, it could become another important part of regular Wuthering Waves gameplay loop. But here's what I think gets especially interesting. If Kuro really is buffing older characters at the same time as introducing new endgame content, then those buffs could have a much more bigger purpose, instead of simply making an older character stronger on paper. And then if the new combat system also introduces different ways of playing the game, you could potentially have older characters. Players could actually have new content where they can use them. New characters, new combat mechanics, and double liberation all interacting within the same endgame game environment. Obviously, we don't know exactly how Kuro is gonna pull all of this together yet, but if most of the system happened, 4.x could end up feeling like a pretty major evolution for Wuthering Waves. And we're also getting this 3D character menu thing that has been leaked for quite a while. And finally, we have something that should be pretty straightforward: 2 free Rover skins. According to the early information, more free Rover customization is apparently planned for the 4.x era. We don't know exactly how these skins will be distributed yet. They could potentially come from an event, limited time event, or even through story progression. But either way, it means more free customization for Rover and for us. And the timing is pretty interesting considering we're also expecting Future Rover sometime during the 4.x era. So depending on how Kuro plans these releases, the new skins and Fusion Rover could potentially line up in some pretty interesting ways. So putting everything together, there's a lot being discussed for the future of Wuthering Waves. We're looking at double liberation skills, buffs for older characters, major revisit of version 1.x content, a new endgame mode, new combat system, a 3D character menu, and 2 free Rover skin. And out of all of these, I think the 2 things that stand out the most are double liberation and the older character buffs, because those 2 systems could directly affect how we actually play the game. Double liberation could create completely new interactions between characters and give team building another layer, and older character buffs could potentially bring some of the game's original characters back into relevance. And then there's the version 1.x revisit. If Kuro really does go back and improve the original story and overall introduction to the game, that could be a huge improvement for both new and returning players. So rather than 4.x simply being another chapter of Wuthering Waves, it could potentially feel like Kuro is updating some of the foundations of the game itself. And I really want to emphasize this, none of this should be treated as fully confirmed yet. We're still talking about early information, teasers, and reports regarding future updates. Things can absolutely change between now and the actual release, and considering how far away the 4.x era is, we're almost certainly gonna get more information and potentially changes to some of these plans over the next few months. So as always, take this information with a grain of salt until Kuro officially announces it. But if these features can actually make it into the game, I think 4.x could be one of the most interesting periods Wuthering Waves has had so far. And now I want to know what you guys think. Which of these features are you the most excited for? Is it the double liberation system, or version 1.x remake, or a new endgame, or older character buffs? Or are you just here for the free Rover skins? Let me know in the comments. And if you will have me to cover all your Wuthering Waves content, please leave a sub, because there's going to be a lot more information coming out as we get closer. Anyway, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see y'all in the next one.